Okay, so there is a really good chance you're watching this explainer right now on a device that fits perfectly in the palm of your hand. You probably unlock the thing dozens of times a day without even a second thought, right? We just call it a smartphone. But have you ever actually stopped to ask who invented it? Or better yet, what is literally happening inside that tiny rectangle of glass and metal while you're holding it? Well, today we're going to break exactly that down. We're diving into the hidden engineering and, honestly, the pretty surprising history behind the device that completely changed our world. I mean, just consider this contrast for a second. The device sitting in your pocket right now can process information faster than the massive room-sized computers that guided the Apollo astronauts to the moon, and it beats them by a massive margin. It is just a staggering technological leap that we entirely take for granted today. But look, this leap didn't just happen overnight.
See, the story doesn't actually start with Apple. It starts way back in 1973 with a Motorola engineer named Martin Cooper. Picture this. He's standing on a New York sidewalk and he makes the first ever handheld mobile phone call. And he famously called a rival over at Bell Labs literally just to rub it in. Now that phone was a 1-kilogram brick. It cost thousands of dollars and it could only make phone calls. Fast forward to 1992 and IBM does something kind of weird. They combine a phone with a PDA to create the Simon Personal Communicator. It had a touchscreen, email, even a calendar. Technically, it was the first smartphone, but it arrived about 15 years too early. Then moving through the 2000s, we got the BlackBerry and the Palm Trio. Business folks absolutely loved them. But honestly, with those physical keyboards, they were still incredibly clunky and pretty niche.
Which brings us to January 9th, 2007. Steve Jobs walks out onto his stage and delivers a presentation that completely resets the entire industry. He tells the crowd that Apple is releasing 3 things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a phone, and an internet communicator. The audience totally thought it was a lineup of 3 different products, and then he paused and delivered a line that changed history. He said, "These aren't 3 separate devices. It was all just one device, the iPhone."
It was a massive paradigm shift. Just glass, touch, and software. By abandoning those physical keyboards and clunky styluses, they created a device that didn't just feel like a new phone. It felt like magic. Now sure, it wasn't the very first smartphone ever made, but it was absolutely the one that redefined what a phone should be. And within a year, Android arrived to compete, which sparked this frantic, unending innovation race that hasn't slowed down since.
So moving on to the anatomy of this magic, what physically happens when you unlock your phone? To really understand it, we need to break it down into 5 hidden systems.
Okay, our first system is the brain, or the system on a chip. If you pop open an old desktop computer, you'll find separate chips scattered all over a giant motherboard. A smartphone changes all of that. It takes the processor, the graphics engine, and the memory controller and squeezes them all together onto a single, tiny piece of silicon, often smaller than your fingernail. This one chip holds billions of transistors, switching on and off billions of times every single second, instantly turning your taps and swipes into actual actions on the screen.
But you know, a brain is useless if it can't perceive its environment, which brings us to the senses. Your phone is constantly reading the physical world around it using these tiny little components. You've got an accelerometer tracking motion. That's how your screen magically knows to rotate when you tilt the device. A gyroscope tracks deeper rotation, mostly for navigation and gaming. There's a proximity sensor that knows exactly when to turn your screen off the split second you hold the phone up to your ear. And a tiny GPS chip is quite literally talking to satellites orbiting the Earth to pinpoint your location down to just a few meters.
Now, to communicate what it senses, the phone relies on its voice. And this is really where the actual phone part still lives. Inside is a super complex set of radios handling your cellular networks, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC. When you load a web page or send a text, this system takes your digital data, converts it into radio waves, and blasts them to a nearby cell tower. From there, it routes your data through a massive web of physical infrastructure. Think fiber optic cables and giant data centers, sending your message to the other side of the planet in just a fraction of a second.
Then, of course, we have the eyes. Modern smartphone cameras aren't just a piece of glass and a sensor anymore. Because the lens is smaller than a coin, engineers had to get super creative, and they did that using computational photography. So when you press the shutter, the phone doesn't just take one picture. It actually captures multiple images at slightly different exposures in a matter of milliseconds. Then this incredible software instantly merges them together into one perfectly balanced shot. This software magic is exactly how your tiny phone can rival massive, bulky traditional cameras. And all of this requires our 5th system, memory. We basically have 2 types working here. First is RAM, which handles your short-term active tasks.
You can think of it kind of like your active disk space. It's where the apps you have open right now live. But when you want to save a photo or keep a text thread forever, it goes into flash storage. That's your filing cabinet. And the real beauty of flash storage is that it persists. It remembers all your data even when the phone's power is completely turned off.
When you put it all together, it is an absolute symphony of milliseconds. Let's say you're texting a photo to a friend. First, the camera system captures and processes the image. Second, the storage system saves the file to your filing cabinet. Third, the system on a chip brain compresses that data. And fourth, the radio fires that message into the sky. Every single one of these incredible systems works together flawlessly to complete that whole sequence before you've even finished blinking.
Now zooming out to the macro scale for just a second. Today, there are literally more smartphones on Earth than there are people who owned a landline at the absolute peak of the 20th century. Think about that. In less than 2 decades, this engineering marvel went from being a niche luxury gadget to a basic human necessity. Billions of people globally rely on these pocket supercomputers for their banking, their work, navigating their daily lives, and just staying in touch with the people they love. But it is so important to remember that this monumental shift wasn't the work of one single genius or one specific company. It's the result of decades of stacking ideas. It took over 100 years of physics, radio engineering, and computer science. Engineers just kept stacking improvements on top of improvements. They built smaller chips, developed better batteries, constructed faster networks, and coded smarter software, over and over, until Martin Cooper's bulky 1973 brick became an actual supercomputer.
So, the next time you pick up your phone to aimlessly scroll, take a second to look a little differently at the device in your hand. You are holding a century of stacked human ingenuity. And it makes you wonder, if this supercomputer is what we achieved in just the last couple of decades, what on earth will the device in our pockets look like 20 years from now? Thanks for watching this explainer.